SOS, SOS, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I think Canada's too far gone, but we'll try and help you as best we can. This is a warning to all of the countries that they're bringing down the Commonwealth. It's their intention to get rid of the Protestant protections, to give them a free rein for their freedom of religion. They're bringing down the Commonwealth, and the way to do that is to bring down the royal family. And that's what's going on in the world. Forget about the COVID. Forget about the war in Russia, whatever's going on. Vladimir Putin, he knows what's going on. He knows a lot more than what you think he knows. He says that what's going on in the world with the New World Religion and the New World Order, all of this has happened before in our time. Now, the time that it happened was way back in 1682. Now, we're going to go back in time a bit. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you some of the people that are going to be involved in our talks today. Specifically, the people that I would like you to know about. What we're working against is this, the United Religions. It's called the United Religions. Now, they use the word Christian here, and they use the word the Islamics and the Jewish and the Christians, but it's not really Christians, it's Catholics. Now, whenever they use this word Christian, let's all remember that there's two types of Christians. There are Protestant Christians and Catholic Christians. They're not the same. Or they can just be Protestants, full stop. I'm just a Protestant. I'm not a Protestant anyone. Anyone that doesn't really believe in any of the religions and just believes in the God of nature and the natural law, they're called Protestants. All right? Now, what these people, the Catholics, the Islamists, and the Jewish people believe, they believe that entire countries should be run by their religions. They don't believe that people should be born to the land and own their nation by their birthright. So they believe in taking over nations. Now, they've set up a Chrislam. They've set up Chrislam here. This is in Abu Dhabi. The Chrislam, which is the Catholic, the Jewish, and the Islamic religions that are all going to be working together. They work together with the New World Order, and there's already setting up a Chrislam in Germany. Now, this is very serious what's going on here, very serious. But the people that we're going to be looking at today is this man here called Paul Hunt. I'll tell you all about these people in a minute. We'll go through the people. We're going around the world today. We're going to Scotland. We're going to Ireland. We're going a little bit to England, United Kingdom. Here we have Joan E. Taylor, who is the wife. She's the wife of John Hunt. Now, these are two very important people that are going to be coming up a lot later. Next that we've got here is Mary Robinson. Now, she's in charge of Catholic, she calls it Ireland, but she's not in charge of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland are the Protestants. She's in the Southern Ireland. Remember that they're Catholics, and the Catholics want Northern Ireland to be part of their Southern Ireland and not have their 1688 Protestant rights. They want to take away their Protestant rights and give them some other kind of human rights. Now I'll come back to talk about her later. We've also, here's Mary Robinson again. We're going to be talking about her. We're going to be going over to Scotland, and we're going to be talking about Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, and we'll be talking about that in a minute as well. And Nicola Sturgeon. We're also going to be talking about the Northern Ireland Prime Minister Michael Martin. A little bit about him. He's the best one in the whole frigging bunch of them. We're going to be talking about Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. We're going to be talking about the Maori King. This is going to be important because we need to know that they're bringing down the British royal family, and they're going to bring down those Protestant rights and replace them with a new set of rights, and they're doing it by appointing new kings. They're going to get rid of the white queen or the white king, and they're going to replace it with a dark king who does not have any of the restrictions of the Protestant rights. We're going to be talking about this man here called Alpito William Co. He can be kind of equated to the Samoan king, although they don't have kings there. He is similar to a Samoan king. We're going to be talking about this very important person here, Russell M. Nelson. Russell M. Nelson is the leader of the Latter-day Saint Church. He runs the 12 Apostles of in America, and he is heavily involved. They want to join together. The Muslims and the Latter-day Saints have joined together. So we're going to be talking a little bit about him, and he's also been meeting together with the Pope. And we're also going to be talking about the Maori king and the Quran being introduced into our Maori, the realm of Maori, since he's been appointed a Maori king. There's a lot of stuff going on. They're after the Protestants. That's what we're after. And then finally, we're going to be talking about the Tongan king and how we can compare our 1688 Bill of Rights to the new constitutions that has been set up by the Pope and all of these various different people. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, and we have to go back to a little bit of the history. I'm going to try my best to keep this short, but it's very hard to keep it short. Now, what we're going to be talking about is Quakers, okay? So, just trying my best here. There's a lot of history to get through, and I'm only one person, but I'm trying to do my best to explain all of this so that everybody knows what the problem is in the Commonwealth and how we need to stand up for our Protestant rights, save our Protestant rights. We need to recognise that the three religions are out to bring down the Protestant religion. So they've all joined together. Now, all Commonwealth countries were under the Protestant religions because of the New Zealand Maori in 1865. They were adopted by Queen Victoria officially. When the New Zealand Maori in 1865 were adopted by Queen Victoria, all natives in every Commonwealth country of Canada and Australia and Africa went under the Protestant rights. Now, the Pope, and as you know, all the Protestant rights absolutely forbid Islamic, Jewish, or Catholic governance over our countries, because they have a lot of laws like decapitation laws and various other cruel and unusual punishments that don't fit with our Protestant rights. Now, what we've got to do, so we know about Chrislam, right? So you all know about Chrislam, so I don't need to talk about that anymore. Everybody's clear on the Chrislam. It's the Catholics, the Islamists, and the Judaist people that have joined together in a single group to bring down the Protestant Queen. That's what they're doing. If you remember rightly, all of the kings and queens of England, Scotland, and Ireland were Catholics, weren't they? And if you remember that the Exchequer Jews used to collect all of the taxes on the lands and force people to pay huge taxes so that they could take the lands from the people, and all of that was thrown out. So I don't need to be telling you about Chrislam anymore. There's the Chrislam. So make sure you keep that in your head. I ain't going to be talking about that no more. Right. who we're going to be focused on at the moment are these two, Paul Hunt and what's her name? Joan E. Taylor. Now, Joan E. Taylor is a Quaker, and so he's a Quaker too. Now, I'm going to talk about him in a minute, but we're going to go back and learn about when the Quakers came about, okay? Now, the Quakers came about in the time of King Charles II, and they used to buy up huge blocks of land from the people, or trade with people and put them all into debt, and then take all of their lands, and they wanted to live this Puritan life. So what you used to do is, just like they're trying to get us to do now, is that you would live in these cult areas, and you would all plant vegetables together on the land together. But if you ever spoke against their leaders, you were thrown off the land and you were left landless. What had happened was, a lot of the people, these Quakers, would go in and meet families, right? And then they would teach them about love and joining together and working together. And they would encourage the people that owned the land to give all of their land to the leaders of the Quakers. And then the Quakers would create bigger and bigger and bigger of tracts of land. And everyone for, 10, 15 years, everyone would work together. They'd plant the vegetables, they'd share the vegetables, they'd do. But what would happen is, if any of the people ever spoke against the leaders, since they had donated their land to the leaders of the Quakers, they would be thrown off their land, and all their years of work would have amounted to nothing, and they would not be able to get their lands back. So this was outlawed in England. Now, these Quakers, now, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, all of them are break-offs of the Quakers. Now, when these Quakers were outlawed in 1688, these Quakers went to America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand and all of the islands, and they set themselves up as missionaries and carried on their Quakery activities of encouraging the owners of the land to give their land to the Quakers to take care of them, to protect them. And when the people of the land suddenly said, hey, we want you Quakers out, the Quakers would set other people that they had negotiated lands with onto the people that spoke against them and have them thrown off the lands or decapitated and cruel and unusual punishments for speaking against them. So this is what's been going on in the world. This was all what was happening in 1600. Now, in 1682, the Protestants were rising up, and then in 1682, put this up, sorry, Queen, I'll hide the Queen. So in 1672, during the time of Prince Charles II, there was a royal declaration of indulgence, and it said that it was to extend religious liberty to the Protestant nonconformists. Well, the Protestants were all the people that didn't want to be in slavery under the Catholic Church and the Jewish people that were taxing them huge amounts of money and taking all of their lands, all right? So they came up, the Protestants started to rise up, and they'd already thrown all of the Jewish people and the Catholics out once, but King Charles brought them all back again, and they came up with this thing called the Declaration of Indulgence, which gave the Protestant people a few rights. But the Protestants were still unhappy with it, and they said that it gave too many rights to the Catholics. Now, there was another Declaration of Indulgence written in 1687, But when this 1687 Declaration of King James II was created, the Protestants were still not happy, and the Anglicans, because they said that it gave too many rights to the Islamists, the Jewish people, the paganists, and the Catholics. So the Protestants still were not, the Protestants were just simply people that didn't want to belong to any of their religions. The Protestants just wanted to be in their own little family, their own little piece of land, and they didn't want anybody coming into their house. They didn't want anybody telling them what to do. They didn't want the cruel and unusual punishments, because if you spoke against any one of these religions, then the penalty were cruel punishments: cutting out of the tongue, decapitation, hangings, burnings, many punishments for anyone that spoke against these religions. So the Protestant just said, hey, we just want to live under the natural law with the trees and the sun and the moon, and we don't want to be bound by all of these laws. So the Protestants in 1688 threw them all out. All right. Now, part of these people, these main people, were also called Quakers. And it was the Quakers that branched out into the world, and they became Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, various others. And then you had the Jewish and you had the Christians. The people that were very unhappy with the 1688 were all of these religions, because they didn't feel that the Protestants should be able to just be able to govern themselves. And so this was the battle that occurred at that time, okay? So I ain't going to talk to you about that anymore. But everyone should understand what the Quakers are. The Quakers, the Jewish people, the Catholics, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, all of them go into that group. And the Protestants are the people that didn't want to have anything to do with religion. They just believed in the natural law, the common law of God. They all went into this other box here. And they brought in the Prince and Princess of Orange. And they said that the Prince and Princess of Orange, because the Catholics had the Pope, the Islamists had the Islamic leader, the Jews had their Jewish leaders, and the Quakers had their Quaker leaders. And so the Protestants said, right, we're going to have Prince and Princess of Orange, and the condition that they can govern us is that they don't let any of these religions in to take us over ever again. All right? So what has happened now is along come Chrislam. Now, the problem is in the 1688, so the Declaration of Indulgence, I'm going to get that out now, so you all know what that is. Now, the problem with this 1688 Bill of Rights, why can't Chrislam function in the world as long as this 1688 Bill of Rights stands? It's mostly because of here. The main part is that no foreign prince or person or state or potentate shall have any jurisdiction, power, superior authority, or authority over any of the Commonwealth countries. But it also, one of the main things is that there are limitations on the kings and the queens, and there are also limitations on the parliament, and there are also Papists and Jewish and Islamists and Quakers and Mormons and Jehovah's are all forbidden from holding the crown or from governing over us. So this is where the separation of church and state comes to being in this 1688 Bill of Rights. And it does say here that their only duty is to strengthen and preserve these laws. That's what they're supposed to be doing in Parliament. In Parliament, they're supposed to be making sure that all people of the Commonwealth countries are able to govern themselves without interference with religious organisations. That is the sole purpose of our Parliament. We can have our local councils. We can have all of our local governance. The main point of Parliament is to stop these religions from enforcing their laws onto the people. That is what the Parliament is there for, and nothing else. They're not there for anything else. They're not there to make your road rules. They're not there to make your health rules. They're not there to make your school rules. Their job is to make sure that we can govern ourselves so that these people don't govern over the top of us. That's what they're there for. So Parliament has forgotten what their role is. And that's why we're in so much trouble, because they've brought in all this United Nations. Now, we're going to start talking about, I'm going to try and tell you as best I can about these people. Right, put that there. So I want to talk about Paul Hunt. All right. So we'll put that over there for a minute so everybody understands what that's all about. And we're going to come back to it later. All right. So we're going to come back to this later. So I want to talk about Paul Hunt. Now, Paul Hunt is the head of the, I'll just put him down so I can just read here. So he is the head of, he is the Human Rights Commissioner of New Zealand. And I think we can just put up Paul Hunt. I don't think I'll put him up, but he is the leader of a thing called the Quaker Project. And he has spent many years in Palestine, many years in Israel. He is the Human Rights Commissioner to New Zealand, and he is the one that is pushing for the 1990 Bill of Human Rights from the United Nations to be entrenched into New Zealand law and to have the 1688 Bill of Rights removed from New Zealand law. Not only that, in the United Kingdom, he is the one that brought the Human Rights Act into the United Kingdom. Now, I'm told that the United Kingdom has been making efforts to get itself out of the Human Rights Act, and that they're trying to put the Human Rights Act into all of our Commonwealth countries and have our 1688 Protestant rights removed, because our Protestant rights does not allow the freedom of religion for them to govern over us. That's what it doesn't allow. Now, David Seymour in New Zealand had asked Paul Hunt, the Human Rights Commissioner, to stand down, and David Seymour has said that the Human Rights Act is unfit for purpose. It has caused nothing but problems in our country. Now, what they've done in all of our countries is they've flooded our tiny countries with refugees that all belong to one of these churches. They're either Islamic, they're Catholic, they're Jehovah's Witnesses, they're Mormons, they're Jewish, and they've flooded our countries with them. And all of these religions have joined together, and they only vote in the place where they're told to vote. So they've got all their votes sorted out, and that what's happening is that they're outvoting our Protestant people, and so we can't win against these people. Now, Joan E. Taylor is the wife of Paul Hunt, right? And she is a Quaker. Not only is she a Quaker, I've got it down here what she is. So she is also involved with archaeology, and she's been translating and identifying Islamic texts and various things like that. She's spent time in Egypt, many years in Israel, many years in Palestine, and she was involved with the Qumran caves. Now, there's a lot of forgery been going on in New Zealand, I think. With our Declaration of Independence, I think a new copy has came up, and I'm saying in my conspiracy theory that it was forged. There are many forged documents coming in all of our countries. There are suddenly these artifacts that are turning up in 1990. There are suddenly these religious texts that are turning up in 1990 where they never existed before. And all of this is, all the people that are involved a lot with this is Joan E. Taylor, who is a Quaker, all right? Now keep her in mind. Now, the next person that okay, so Paul is involved with he was working in the UK as well. He is from England. He is involved with the interdenominational project, Human Rights Project of Britain and Ireland. That is Catholic Ireland, not Northern Ireland, and this is called the Quaker Project. And the president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, she is also a Quaker. So let's go on. I'll leave Paul over there. All right, so she is also a Quaker, okay? Now let's go on to Mary Robinson. Now, Mary Robinson used to be the Commissioner of the Human Rights. She is very, very, very good friends with this man here from Africa called Mo Ibrahim. And what they've been doing in New Zealand, I don't know about your countries, is they've been importing thousands of refugees that are of their religions from their churches into our countries. And in New Zealand, they changed the law to allow foreigners in Parliament. 60% of New Zealand Parliament are currently foreigners of Islamic, Judaic, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, even Catholics in our Parliament, which is all against our 1688 Bill of Rights. And our New Zealand people have lost control. They can no longer win the vote. We're trying to get into the courts. It's hard to get in the courts. The only way they'll let you in the courts is if you add human rights law, which belongs to the United Nations. Now, Mo Ibrahim started up a foundation, and it's called the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and it gives $5 million prizes to people that it thinks are doing a lot of stuff in the human rights area. So I wonder if Paul Hunt got any of the 5 million. And Mary Robinson, she's sitting on the board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation that gives out these $5 million donations. So that's Mary Robinson. We'll put her over here for a minute. Don't know what she's up to. Now, here's Mary Robinson, and she's there together with these people that are called elders. Now, the Jehovah's Witness and the Mormons all call their leaders elders, and now the Islamists are calling themselves elders as well these days. And here is the High Commissioner. She was the High Commissioner of the Human Rights, and now Paul Hunt is the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and he's all over in England, he's over in New Zealand, he's over in Catholic Ireland, and you'll see in a minute he's over there in Scotland as well. And that is Graycar McKell with Mary Robson, and she is also working together with Mo Ibrahim and in Africa. So they're heading up Africa. They're all through. Let's all remember that Africa was a Commonwealth country. They did have an African king, but he went rogue. And so what the church did, the missionaries did, what had happened was when the 1688 Bill of Rights came along and wiped out the Declaration of Indulgence, what had happened was all those organisations hopped countries. They went over to New Zealand, they went over to Africa, they went over to Canada, they went over to the islands, and they had set up kings in each of these countries in the 1800s. What had happened was, in 1840, the Majesty moved in, because this was a new world order. This new world order has sprung up many, many times in our history. This is just another time in our history, and we need to stop it again. Well, when the Majesty set up the law of the seas and set up the Commonwealth in all of these countries, 54 countries, and she gave them all the 1688 Bill of Rights, which forbid all of these leaders from taking over in those 54 countries. When the Quakers and the Catholics and the Judaists, when they were all thrown out of England and Scotland and Ireland in 1688, and we brought in the Prince and Princess of Orange to protect us from these religions, to protect the Protestants, what had happened was all these religions, when they went into all those other countries, the battle then began again. So then Scotland and Northern Ireland and England and Germany went out into the world and created the law of the seas. And what they did was they put the 1688 Bill of Rights onto the ship, and they sent it out to all of these countries, and they sent thousands of our people, our Scottish people, our Irish people, our Germanic people, our English people. They were all put on ships and sent out into these countries to combat these religions that had gone and set up in those countries. Now, the New Zealand Maori saved the day. They brought in this Treaty of Waitangi, and in 1865 they got themselves adopted by Queen Victoria and made themselves subjects by Queen Victoria, all right, in 1865. Now, when they did that, all people in all Commonwealth countries went under the protections of the 1688. Now, when all this, because it was in 1840 that this first began to occur, that British law went into New Zealand. In 1850 and in 1870 or something, the Catholic Church or the missionaries or the Quakers or whatever you want to call them, they set up kings in each of these countries. There was a king, black kings. Now, so we got our white queen. They set up a black king in Africa, a black or a brown king in Tonga, a brown king in New Zealand. I'm not sure if there were any more kings or queens set up, but they set them up in various countries around, various Commonwealth countries around the world. And what they've been after all these years is to destroy the adoption that occurred between Queen Victoria and the New Zealand native, they were called native Aboriginals back then, they're called Maori now. And so the goal was to get rid of this adoption, because as long as this adoption stood, and as long as Northern Ireland and Scotland and England and all the Commonwealth had this 1688, the Chrislam could never come to be. Now, a series of events have happened. So they set these kings up in the 1800s. So the goal was to eliminate the Russian royal family. They were all eliminated, as you know. And now they need to get rid of the English royal family that were brought in by the Prince and Princess of Orange, which emanated from the Russian royal family and the Germanic royal families. It's all tied in there. And so now let's remember that all of these, the Quakers, the Catholics, the Jewish, the Islamists, they were all thrown out of our countries and forbidden to govern over us. Right, so we've got to keep moving on. So that's Mary Robson. She was the leader, so she's in on all of this, all right? Put her over there, and then we'll put her over here. Now, we want to go to this woman here in Scotland. Now, this is, so this is Nicola Sturgeon, and she was the Scottish Prime Minister, all right? And if you see here, now you never can get pictures of these together, but every now and then you might find one. You see here deep in the back, there is Paul Hunt, okay? Now, here he is here, Paul Hunt, right? Now, Nicola Sturgeon, here is a clear case. Now, if you see that pink flag, so that pink flag belongs to an organisation called MAP, M-A-P, capital M, capital A, capital P. Now, we all know that our Protestant religion, what have they been bringing in? That their goal is to get rid of as many Protestants as what they can by any means that they are able to do. And one of the ways that they want to get rid of our people is by teaching homosexuality to our children, by bringing in transgenderism to our schools. In New Zealand, they are aborting Protestant babies at 9 months in the womb. They're literally tearing these babies limb by limb. I shit you not. When they try to do this abortion, they can't do a cesarean section. At 9 months old, if they do a cesarean section, the baby will come out live. And then they'd have to kill it, wouldn't they? So they take their abortion sucking machine and they have to suck these babies out. But because it's a 9-month-old baby, it can't be sucked out. So they have to decapitate the limbs, limb by limb. They cut off a leg and they suck it out. They cut off an arm and they suck it out. This is a cruel, it's got to be the most cruelest thing known to mankind, brought in by the 60% of foreigners in New Zealand Parliament, and Jacinda Ardern, who is great friends with Paul Hunt and his Quaker wife, who is very good friends with Mary Robson, who's also a Quaker from Catholic Ireland. So this thing called, so they bring in all the homosexuality to our children. They're aborting 9-month-old fetuses in the womb and delimbing them within the womb. I'm sorry, this is so graphic for you, but This is the reality of what they're doing to the Protestant people. And then there's the map. And the map stands for minor attracted people. And you see there's a little, it's not quite a child there, but they've taken this picture to make it look like it's a child. It's probably just a short adult, but we all know where this is heading. We're going to get religious freedom. Here's your religious freedom, and then we're going to have your sexual freedoms, and then we're going to have the molestation of children freedoms. Because we saw only a few years ago that they brought in the homosexual flag, right? And now they're bringing in the minor attracted people flag. So, they're yanking 9-month-old fetuses out the womb. They're teaching our little 5-year-old children that men can get periods and men can have babies. And
what, so you're not going to read me again?
I'm not, because I'm making my video and you're disturbing. It's a very serious topic. Right. So that is Mary Sturgeon. Now, Mary Sturgeon brought in Paul Hunt as the advisor to the human rights leadership. Now, she did this during the time when the United Kingdom had decided, England had decided that they might be repealing the Human Rights Act. And they might be repealing the Human Rights Act because it's got too many religious freedoms. It was very dangerous for us Protestant people. So when that happened, Mary Sturgeon brought in Paul Hunt. So Paul Hunt and his wife, Joan E. Taylor, they're working between all of our countries. They're in New Zealand. They're in Scotland. They're in Northern Ireland. I don't think they're in Northern Ireland. They're in Southern Ireland. They're in England. They're in Israel. They're in Palestine. Now, in 1986, all our constitutions were removed illegally. Removed from England, removed from New Zealand, removed from Australia, removed from Canada, and they were all removed illegally, I was going to say. Now, funnily enough, New Zealand, England, and Israel, I'm very suspicious, have not got a written constitution since 1986. And they brought in all this human rights stuff. So there's a lot going on here. I'm just giving you a very short overview. There's a lot going on here. But the main thing that we're trying to tell you, I'll just remind you what it's about. You're not going to know until we get to the end. What all this is about is that they're trying to replace Our Majesty the Queen, who has the supreme Protestant law on her crown, and they're trying to replace it with a Tongan king, or I'm thinking there are 3 kings. I think there are 3 kings. I believe in my conspiracy theory. There's the Maori king, the Tongan king, and I don't know who's the 3rd king. Now, originally there was a 3rd king over in Africa. So there were 3 kings, one in Africa, one in Tonga, and one in New Zealand, all set up in the 1800s. Not so long after the 1688 came in to get rid of the Declaration of Indulgence. So this battle is just going on and on and on above us. We all have not been aware, but we need to be aware. Now let's move on. There's a lot of people. So that's Mary Sturgeon. And so she's very involved. It's all centered around these 2. So just remember all what's going on. Now we have got over here the Scottish Prime Minister. Now, his name's Michael Martin. Now, not Scottish, sorry, the Northern Ireland Prime Minister. From what I can see, he's pretty, I don't know, you'll have to tell me Northern Ireland, but he doesn't seem to be involved with all of this lot. So, all we know is that Catholic Ireland is very involved. There's Catholic Ireland and there's all of these others. We've got Ham, then we've got Mary Robinson, then we've got that Sturgeon woman, right? So they're all in it together. And then we've got, he doesn't seem to be involved with it all. So let's just wait and see about him. You can all send me a message if there's anything about him. Now, who's coming up next? Who's coming up next? Jacinda Ardern again. Now, Jacinda Ardern, now is that Jacinda Ardern with Mary Robinson? And so she, of course, has appointed, I have to keep all my things open here. So she, of course, has appointed Paul Hunt to be the head commissioner of the human rights in New Zealand. And there she is with Mary Robinson. And I don't know, but is that Melinda Gates? Someone can tell me about this picture, but it looks like Melinda Gates. But I don't know. You can come and tell me. But anyway, now Jacinda Ardern. Now, Jacinda Ardern is quite good friends with Mary Sturgeon. Now, Mary Sturgeon, now Mary Sturgeon is a Quaker, I think. So I don't know, but you can all get back to me, but I think she's a Quaker. But Jacinda Ardern reckons that she's left the Mormon Church. Now, the Mormon Church, they have made a pact with the Muslims and the Latter-day Saints because they want to govern our countries and they can't govern them as long as the Protestant law stands. So what the United Nations is doing, they have gone, so Scotland and Ireland, this is going to be really hard for you, and England. What they've done is they've gone to Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and they have, they're trying to transfer the entire country to the few tribal communities and giving them complete control over the entire country. And they're saying that this is called the decolonization movement, but it is nothing less than a land grab. They've taken all of our native people, they've put them into the Indigenous rights at the United Nations, and then they brought in this Human Rights Act with its freedom of religion. Here, this is what it's all about, folks, the freedom of religion. So they're getting our native, we're in stages here. The first stage that they did was to get all of our native people out of the 1688 Bill of Rights and put them all into the Indigenous rights. That was stage one. Now, where is he? In 1972 and 1973, the Parliament of Northern Ireland was closed down. I'm not sure what happened there, and England took over. Well, in 1975, the New Zealand Maori Queen went to visit the Pope, and they then invited the United Nations into New Zealand. And they said to the United Nations, we don't want to be governed by the Queen anymore. They said, we don't trust the Queen and we want the entire country back. Now, this was all set up. There's a whole story going there, but we're not talking about that today. But since that happened, all the New Zealand Maori, then, because as I told you, all native people in Australia and Canada went under the protections of the New Zealand Maori by the 1688. When the New Zealand Maori removed themselves from their adoption of Queen Victoria, all of the natives of all of our Commonwealth countries went under the United Nations. That was all done by Paul Hunt and Jacinda Ardern. Her father was very involved with that, right? Who's a Mormon. They're all Mormons. There's a whole nother video on that. So, now I don't want to get confused here, but there's quite a lot too. So then you see that the Mormon Church, so this is Mary Robinson, and so she also is promoting various religions as well. And then you've got the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints doing that as well. And then you've got the Quakers also very involved with that. And what had happened was, I'll find my bit of paper. Hang on. It's a lot to remember. So, in 1875, the Tongan king, a Tongan king was created by the missionaries, which were the Quakers and the Catholic Church. And in 1850, a Maori king was created. And I think an African king, so 3 kings, right, were created. Also an African king was created. I know that, but I haven't got that for you today. Now, in 2019, when did he go to visit the Pope? So in 2019, the Maori king went to visit the Pope. His mother went to visit the Pope in 1975. At the time when the Northern Ireland Parliament was closed and taken over by England, the Maori king's mother in 1975 was visiting the Pope. We haven't got a picture of that, but there is evidence that she was. And then the Waitangi Tribunal opened and the United Nations was invited into New Zealand to take over. And I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this. Now, in 2019, so at some point in time, this is Russell M. Nelson, the leader of the Mormon Church or the Latter-day Saint Church. Around about the same time, he went to visit the Pope. At the same time, in 2019, Alpito William Seo went to visit the Pope. Now, he's practically the king of Samoa. He's the leader of the Mormon Church. So they went to visit the Pope around about the same time. All right. Oh, no, they didn't. He went to visit, I get them mixed up here. Hang on. The Maori king. The Maori king and Russell M. Nelson went to visit the Pope around about similar times. Okay? And then our Peter William Seo, who is in our parliament, he went to visit the Pope, and at exactly the same time that he was visiting the Pope, Russell M. Nelson, the leader of the Latter-day Saint Church, was meeting with Jacinda Ardern in the New Zealand Parliament and giving her the Book of Mormon to put into the New Zealand Parliament, and that sits in there today, which is against our Protestant law. Okay, it's all going to get a bit confusing. Now, I'm almost at the end here. Now, in 2013, on the 28th of October, now this date, 28th of October, is extremely significant. The 28th of October was when the missionaries got the New Zealand Maori to sign a Declaration of Independence and leave the protectorship of Australia and of England. Once they did that, the missionaries, the Catholic Church, the Quakers, the Mormons, the Jehovah's, the Jewish people, whatever you want to call them, there were dozens of them there, they all proceeded to buy up all of the New Zealand lands, almost all of it, actually. And the Majesty, Queen Victoria, well, the Majesty, the King at the time, came in, and then Queen Victoria, and confiscated all of these lands from the missionaries, took it all back from them. And all of these missionaries set up the kings in the 1800s. Now this declaration, once the declaration was signed on the 28th of October 1835, it meant that land sales were permitted. Previous to that, land sales were not permitted. And so that was done on the 28th of October. In the 28th of October of 2013, this man here called Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad Khalifatul Masif translated the Quran into the New Zealand Tereo language. The Tereo language, in my opinion, is not the New Zealand Maori language, but they say it is, but it isn't. But anyway, he went on to a marae and presented the Maori king with a translated version of the Quran. So what we've got here in our New Zealand is we've got the New Zealand Prime Minister getting the Book of Mormon. We've got the Maori king getting the Quran, all right? And then we've got Mary Robinson teaming up with Mo Ibrahim, and perhaps even the King of Africa. Perhaps he's going to be the King of Africa if they need three kings, all right? We've got them all teaming up together. He's Muslim, by the way, all right? So I'm just saying that these are all the characters involved. I'm not putting down any of these religions. I'm happy for you to have these religions. It's very wonderful. I teach Muslim children. I love the Muslim children, but there are many Islamic countries, there are Jewish countries, and we need to protect our Protestant religion as well. So I'm not against any of you religions, but we need to make sure that we keep our Protestant religion protected, just like you want to keep your religions protected. Now, what's the difference between all of your religions and our Protestant religion? Well, all of your religions have got laws that of decapitation, of taking out our eyes, of cutting off our hands, of cutting out our tongues, of the Protestant people that speak against you, that do anything against you. All of these things. I'm very surprised that the homosexual community is supporting all of this, because under all of their laws, you're going to be dead in the future. So all you homosexuals should be standing under the protections of the Protestant laws. I mean, you're mad if you're not doing it. So you should go and research that. So all of these people are teaming up. Now, we get to this Tongan king. Now, here's what I want to just show you on my screen. Now, this is the Tongan king called King Tupou VI. The first king was set up. Now, he's been recently made a monarch. Our Majesty Queen Elizabeth is a monarch, all right? And then the Maori king is not a monarch. The Maori king doesn't actually have a crown, but I have been told that he recently was crowned in a secret ceremony with the Pope. Now, if you remember back in England, pre-1688 or pre-1600, all of the kings were appointed by the Catholic Pope. And the Catholic Pope and the Jewish people all worked very well to collect the interest on the lands and the exchequers and all of those, they held all the lands, all right? And they appointed all the kings. These kings are all appointed, and they were appointed by the missionaries in the 1800s. So you might as well say they were appointed by the Catholics. I mean, that's what's going on. So I wanted to show you this. This is where I wanted to get to now that you've seen all of that. We've still got a lot of research to do. Hoping if there are any Scottish people on there, please share. If there are any Irish, please share to Northern Ireland. So let's have a look at this Human Rights Act. This is the Human Rights Act in New Zealand. It's very important that if you're in Scotland or Northern Ireland, that you familiarise yourself with the Human Rights Act of New Zealand 1993. Now, in this, because if we go down, you're going down. If we're all going down together, I'm telling you. So it says here in K, it's very significant here because it's in section K, and it says here the desirability of New Zealand becoming bound by any international instrument on human rights. Now, currently, we are under the instrument of the Queen. It says it right there. The Prince and Princess of Orange and her heirs and successors, all right, and whom it has pleased Almighty God to make the glorious instrument of delivering this kingdom from popery and arbitrary power. See, these all come under arbitrary power. Even the United Nations is arbitrary power. Paul Hunt is arbitrary power. So we currently are under here, but they're making moves in KII to make New Zealand bound by another instrument, and that is the instrument of the United Nations human rights. Now, why do they want us to come under the United Nations human rights? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the United Nations human rights, they've got freedom of thought and freedom of religion. And why do they want their freedom of religion? Well, it's because they want to govern and they want to own all the lands, and they don't want us to own the lands. They want to have it all put into their power. So that's why they need their freedom of religion. Now, if you look here in the 1688, there's no freedom of religion. There isn't, because it says here, it forbids foreigners or ecclesiastical leaders or spiritual leaders or prelates or any other states from having any power, any jurisdiction, any preeminence, any authority in our countries. They need rid of it for their new world order, their one world religion, for that to be totally morphed into its full evolution. They need to get rid of this. And the way they're going to do it is through this king. Now, what they've done is they've set him up with, they've set him up with a Bill of Rights. No different from the Majesties. They're almost exactly the same. The only difference is this: there shall be no more freedom of speech. So because it says it shall be lawful in addition, so it says, this is where they're going to give you freedom of speech with exceptions. It shall be lawful to speak, write, and print opinions, but no law shall ever be enacted to restrict this liberty. There shall be freedom of speech and of the press forever. But here, now, but nothing in this clause shall be held to outweigh the law of defamation, official secrets, or the laws for the protection of the king and the royal family. Now, you see, that is the difference. Because in our freedom of speech, we're allowed to, no courts, no acts of parliament, no king, no queen can ever stop us from speaking freely. In fact, the one that is not allowed to speak freely is Her Majesty. She's not allowed to speak freely about anything. Her Majesty gave up her right to speak so that we could have our right to speak. She did. Now, whereas these religions, the Islamic religion, the Catholic religion, and the Jewish religion forbid you to speak against their leaders or their church. That is a crime. And in this case, it's going to be illegal to speak against the king and the royal family. Now, they have this law here in Thailand. So this is a limited freedom of speech. Also, in their freedom of speech, it shall be lawful in addition to the exceptions set out in subclause 1 to enact such laws as are considered necessary or expedient in the public interest, national security, public order, morality, cultural traditions of the kingdom, privileges of the legislative assembly, to provide for contempt of court and the commission of any offence. So basically, the parliament, the cultural traditions, the morality, the morality committee, the cultural committee, the kingly committee, the privilege committee, the legislative committee, they can all make laws that will suppress your freedom of speech if they think that it hurts any of them. So basically, you can't talk about anything. So goodbye, freedom of speech. There will be a freedom of worship. All men are free to practice their religion and to worship God as they deem fit, in accordance with the dictates of their own conscience, and to assemble for religious service in such places as they may appoint. But it shall not be lawful to use this freedom to commit evil. Well, what is evil? They believe that if you speak against them, cutting your tongue out is within their laws. They believe that if you commit adultery, then you should be stoned to death. So it may not be evil in your religion, but their religion, but it's maybe evil in your religion. So they're totally opening up the door for all of these ancient religious practices that were forbidden in 1688, because that came under cruel and unusual punishment. We forbid cruel and unusual punishment. And here they've basically said you can do any religious practices that you deem fit for your religion. So that's gone. And I'm not going to read all of this, but the main things that have been completely removed here is anything to do with the Catholic religion, the separation of church and state has been removed. The supremacy law to prevent religious leaders from governing or having any power has been removed. So it seems to me that if they can get out this 1688 from our countries, all right, and then if they can, the first stage, all right, I'll come back to you here. So the first stage was to get all of our native people. So they've been doing this since the 1840s. Well, that's not even the first stage. The first stage was in 1840 when the ecclesial leaders, the Quakers and the Catholics, lost all of the Commonwealth lands by the law of the seas. And the 1688 was shipped out to all of the countries to protect all of the native people and all of their lands. So the first stage that the missionaries did, starting from 1841, they set up the Polynesian Society, and then they set up a king in each of the countries. They set up a king in Tonga, a king in New Zealand, a king in Africa, South Africa. The next stage was in 1960. In 1960, they changed the criteria to be indigenous, and they changed it from, it used to have to be 100%. They changed it from being 100% to 50%. The next stage that they did was in the 1975 with New Zealand Maori and all native people. Actually, they changed the percentage to be anyone that identifies as an indigenous person. So you could be a person born in Saudi Arabia, and you could be sent to New Zealand, raised by a native New Zealand family, and then you can claim indigeneity as a New Zealand Maori. So anyone that identifies, and nowadays they're saying anyone that can speak the language and can claim that they are indigenous to our countries. And they're bred. Then the next stage was a breeding program. They sent out thousands of people from the Pacific Islands to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, to breed through all the native populations. And presently, those children are all in their 30s and 40s now, and they're heading up all of the Indigenous trusts, is what was the second stage. The next stage was to have all of the native people of our Commonwealth countries transferred to the Indigenous rights in the United Nations. That was the next stage. They're all in there now. And then the next stage was to have these human rights instituted into all of our countries by Paul Hunt. Paul Hunt's been doing that. And as you can see, he set it up with Paul Hunt. Very significant, he is. Can't find him now. So Paul Hunt set up the human rights in England. He has set up the human rights in New Zealand. He came to be the advisory for Scotland, and I'm not sure about Northern Ireland, but hey, Northern Ireland, if we go down, you go down with us. And I'm not sure who set it all up in Canada, but I'm sure he's got a hand in it, right? So Canada has got America working on them. America has worked all through Canada, and he's working in all of our countries together with the Ardurns, okay? Now, the next step is to, they have stopped using the 1688 Bill of Rights in our countries, and they have trained all of our lawyers to use only the United Nations Human Rights Act in the court for any things against us, where actually our 1688 Bill of Rights is quite sufficient for all of these things that we need. No cruel and unusual punishment, no arbitrary laws, no shutting down our free speech. All of these things are in our 1688 Bill of Rights, and it's very good law for us Protestants. And so now they've come up with the that I just told you about, the 1993, where they're going to transfer the desirability of New Zealand becoming bound by international instruments on human rights. This Human Rights Act here, they are trying to entrench it into New Zealand law to be the supreme law over and above the 1688 Bill of Rights. So they've got these three things that they're presently working. This is where they are at the moment. So we've been very behind, but we're slowly catching up to what these globalists are up to. So what they've got is they've got this, all right, so they've got their king with his new Bill of Rights. They've got the king set up. So he's all ready to go, all right? And then they've recently made him a monarch. So he is the new monarch. And then they've got this Human Rights Act, where they've got us transferring the instrument from the Majesty, the Queen, to the United Nations. And then they've got this New Zealand Bill of Rights, which they are now petitioning to entrench into New Zealand law. And then they're going to bring in the kings, all right? And so they're slowly picking away at the royal family, picking them off one by one, and we're down to just a few members. They've cut off all their money supply. The Majesty has gone from the palace, and they're just making up these fake stories, any story that they can find. They sent over Meghan Markle as the floozy woman to get Prince Harry, so that eliminated him. Then they made up this fake story, the 17-year-old masseuse with Prince Andrew, which was just, he paid it off. But why did he? Because if he fought the case, he was going to have to leave England and go to America, a very dangerous thing for him to do. They didn't even care. They probably, I'm saying 99%, they were going to lose the case, but they didn't even care, because all they wanted was Prince Andrew out of England. And then all we've got is the Majesty, Queen of England now. If Prince Andrew had been out of England when the Majesty passes, and they've got all this thing, and we would have been down to only Prince William and Prince Charles. The royal family is very weak at the moment. We've not been taking care of them, and all of this thing. So I'm thinking they're setting up a new kingly rule, and it's all going to be happening in New Zealand with the Maori king. And of course, the Ardurns, and of course, Mary Contrary, and of course, Mo Ibrahim. They're all there. So that's the end of the video. But Scotland, Ireland, we've all got to stand together. They're bringing down the Commonwealth. And SOS, I'll put up, where's my SOS sign? I can find it. I like to finish my video with that. Sorry, Scotland, I've spelled you wrong. All right. God save the Queen. Long live the Majesty, the Queen. We've got to start. I would encourage you, every single one of you, put a picture of the Queen up in your house. Print the 1688, put it up in your house. Get these human rights out of your country, and protect our Protestant rights. We've got to start standing up for the Protestants. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Don't listen to them. They're going through the native people. and they're bringing down the royal family of England, and they're setting up a new royal family under a different Bill of Rights that gives them all their religious freedoms and all of that. You know, we've been down this road hundreds of years ago. We've got Vladimir Putin behind us. He knows what's going on. He says this has happened in our history before. All the royal family of Russia were killed. They were shot, them all. A few, the royal family of England are bloodlines from the royal family of Russia. I don't understand all of that. Forgive me, everybody. But I'm telling you, we've all got to stand up for our Protestant rights. SOS, SOS, save the Commonwealth. Save the Commonwealth and our Protestant rights. Kate Floss, citizen historian, citizen journalist, signing out from wherever I am in the world, and it's not New Zealand. Amen.